टेबल के नीचे
आदाब। गालिब इंस्टीट्यूट की ये रिवायत रही है कि वो अपने मेहमानों के इस्तेमाल फूलों और किताबों से करते हैं। मेरी डॉक्टर मोहम्मद अफशर साहब से दरख्वास्त है कि आप किताब और फूलों का गुलदस्ता प्रोफेसर अरविंद साहब की खिदमत में पेश करवाएं। सर, इसमें गालिब इंस्टीट्यूट की बहुत अहम मौजूदात हैं। मेरी अपने तौफीक साहब से दरख्वास्त है कि वो प्रोफेसर अफशार आलम साहब बीसी जामिया हमदर्द की खिदमत में फूल पेश फरमाएं। मेरे और एक और साथी जनाब मुश्ताक अहमद साहब से दरख्वास्त है कि आप डॉक्टर फरीदुद्दीन फरीद असर साहब की खिदमत में किताबों का तोहफा और गुलदस्ता पेश फरमाएं। मोहतरमा यास्मीन साहिबा से दरख्वास्त है कि आप जस्टिस जनाब बदर दुर्रेज अहमद साहब चेयरमैन गालिब इंस्टीट्यूट की खिदमत में फूल पेश फरमाएं। मैं हाज़रीन की जानिब से इजाजत चाहता हूँ प्रोफेसर सदीक-ur-रहमान किदवाई साहब की खिदमत में फूल पेश करने। फखरुद्दीन अली अहमद मेमोरियल लेक्चर 22 मई 2023 बउनवान हिकमत इंसानी का इल्म ज़मा व मकान से मावरा एपिस्टेमेस ऑफ ह्यूमन विजडम ट्रांसेंडिंग स्पेस टाइम। काबिल एहतराम प्रोफेसर अरविंद साहब वाइस चांसलर पंजाबी यूनिवर्सिटी पटियाला, मोहतरम मकाम जस्टिस जनाब बदर दुर्रेज अहमद साहब चेयरमैन गालिब इंस्टीट्यूट, मोहतरम प्रोफेसर मोहम्मद अफशार आलम साहब वाइस चांसलर जामिया हमदर्द, उस्तादुल असातिज़ा प्रोफेसर सदीक-ur-Rahman Kidwai साहब सेक्रेटरी गालिब इंस्टीट्यूट, जनाब फरीदुद्दीन फरीद साहब कल्चरल काउंसिल ईरान कल्चर हाउस और मुअज़्ज़ज़ हाज़रीन। कुछ फखरुद्दीन अली अहमद साहब के बारे में। जनाब फखरुद्दीन अली अहमद मरहूम हिंदुस्तान के निहायत महबूब सियासी रहनुमा और 5वें सदर जमहूरिया हिंद थे। आप 24 अगस्त 1974 से लेकर 11 फरवरी 1977 तक सदर जमहूरिया हिंद रहे। आपकी विलादत 13 मई 1905 को दिल्ली में हुई। आपके वालिद का नाम कर्नल जुल्नून अली अहमद था। आपने बॉर्डर दिल्ली के सरकारी स्कूल और दिल्ली के सरकारी हाई स्कूल में तालीम हासिल की। आला तालीम के लिए आप 1923 में इंग्लैंड गए, जहां सेंट कैथरीन कॉलेज कैम्ब्रिज में तालीम हासिल की। जनाब फखरुद्दीन अली अहमद ने वकालत को अपना पेशा बनाया। पंडित जवाहरलाल नेहरू और मौलाना अबुल कलाम आज़ाद से उनके करीबी मरासिल थे और यही वजह थी कि 1934 में आप जंग आज़ादी में दिलाए सिपाही की सूरत में कूद पड़े। कलकत्ता के बजाय गुवाहाटी में प्रैक्टिस शुरू कर दी और चंद बरसों ही में आसाम के हर दिल अजीज लीडर बन गए। उनकी जहानत और खुलूस का नतीजा था कि उन्हें जो जिम्मेदारी सौंपी जाती या वो खुद लेते, उसका मुकद्दर बदल कर रख देते थे। उन्होंने इंटरनेशनल कांग्रेस में शमूलियत इख्तियार की और तहरीक आज़ादी में बढ़ चढ़ कर हिस्सा लिया। 1942 में भारत छोड़ो तहरीक के दौरान गिरफ्तार हुए और उन्हें 3 साल से ज्यादा कैद की सजा हुई। उन्होंने 1936 में आसाम प्रदेश कांग्रेस कमेटी में शमूलियत अख्तियार की और 1947 था 1974 तक AICC के रुकन रहे। 1939 में उनको आसाम में वजीर माल का ओहदा तफवीज़ हुआ। उस वक्त वो सबसे कम उम्र वजीर थे। 1940 में जब कांग्रेस ने अंग्रेज गवर्नमेंट के खिलाफ मुहिम चलाई तो दूसरे लीडरों की तरह आपको भी नजरबंद किया गया। वो 1 साल तक हिरासत में रहे और जब रिहाई मिली तो उसके चंद माह बाद ही उनको 1942 में फिर जेल भेज दिया गया। 3 साल जेल में रहने के बाद 1945 में रिहा हुए। उन्होंने जेल में भी वक्त ज़ाया नहीं किया और इस मौके से फायदा उठाते हुए खुद को मुताले के लिए वक्फ कर दिया। 1966 में मोहतरमा इंदिरा गांधी ने उनको अपनी कैबिनेट में लिया तो यहाँ वो एक के बाद दीगरे कई वजारतों में रहे। उनका अदबी ज़ौक़ भी बुलंद था और वो उसके लिए ठोस और अमली इक़दाम करने के हक में थे। चुनाचे 1969 में हिंदुस्तान और पूरी दुनिया में गालिब सदी तकरीबात जिस आला पैमाने पर मुनक़िद की गई वो उन्हीं की कोशिशों का नतीजा था। आज आप जिस शानदार ऐवान-ए-ग़ालिब में तशरीफ़ फरमा है ये उन्हीं की काविशों का समरा है। उन्होंने ही इस इदारे का मंसूबा बनाया और इस इदारे को किस तरह काम करेगा उसका खाका भी उन्होंने ही मुरतब किया था। इस इदारे की लाइब्रेरी के सिलसिले में वो खुसूसन बहुत हसास थे और राष्ट्रपति भवन में भी जब इस इदारे के ताल्लुक से कोई शख्स मिलने जाता तो लाइब्रेरी के सिलसिले में ज़रूर पूछते कि कितनी किताबें खरीदी गई हैं, गालिब कलेक्शन में कितना इजाफा हुआ है, वगैरह वगैरह। फखरुद्दीन अली अहमद साहब ने जो भी फैसले लिए उनके नताइज बड़े दूर रस थे। उनकी इंसान दोस्ती और इल्म व अदब पर परवरी के जौहर उनकी नस्ल में भी मुंतकिल हुए। चुनाचे आपके फर्जंद जस्टिस जनाब बदर दुर्रेज़ अहमद साहब मारूफ कानूनदा और जम्मू कश्मीर हाई कोर्ट के चीफ जस्टिस रहे हैं और इस इदारे के चेयरमैन भी हैं। आप इस इंसानियत की आला इक़दार और इल्म व अदब की तरक्की के लिए दिल रखते हैं। आपकी रहबरी का नतीजा है कि इदारा हर किस्म की कंट्रोवर्सी से अब तक पाक है। इस सूरत में हम कह सकते हैं कि गो आज फखरुद्दीन अली अहमद जैसा लीडर मनसूबा साज कायद हमारे दरमियान नहीं है, लेकिन इस कमी की बड़ी तलाफी जस्टिस जनाब बदर दुर्रेज़ अहमद साहब की वजह से हो जाती है। हज़रात, जैसे कि आपको इल्म है गालिब इंस्टीट्यूट साल में 2 मेमोरियल लेक्चर मुनक़्क़िद करता है, जिसमें एक फखरुद्दीन अली अहमद मेमोरियल लेक्चर, दूसरा बेगम आबदा अहमद मेमोरियल लेक्चर। इन दोनों लेक्चर्स के लिए किसी अहम शख्सियत को दावत दी जाती है। हमारी खुशकिस्मती है कि आज के इस लेक्चर के लिए पंजाबी यूनिवर्सिटी के वाइस चांसलर प्रोफेसर अरविंद साहब तशरीफ लाए हैं, जो हिकमत इंसानी का इल्म ज़मा व मकासिद मुआवरा के मौजू पर लेक्चर पेश करेंगे। प्रोफेसर अरविंद एक मारूफ क्वांटम फिजिसिस्ट हैं। वो इंडियन इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ साइंस एंड रिसर्च इंस्टीट्यूट मोहाली में बहैसियत दीन खदमात अंजाम दे चुके हैं और इस वक्त हमारे मुल्क की एक निहायत मारूफ दानिशगाह यानी पंजाबी यूनिवर्सिटी पटियाले के वाइस चांसलर की हैसियत से खिदमत अंजाम दे रहे हैं। आपकी सरपरस्ती में पंजाबी यूनिवर्सिटी पटियाले ने बहुत तरक्की की है। कुदरत ने मासूम को बुर्दबारी और ज़बरदस्त क़ुव्वत फैसले की सलाहियत दी है। मेरी उनसे सिर्फ एक बार की मुलाकात है जब हम आपकी यूनिवर्सिटी में दीवान-ए-ग़ालिब पंजाबी की रस्म रुनमाई की तकरीब के सिलसिले में गए थे तो आपकी गुफ्तगू और खुद नवाजी से मैं और मेरे स्टाफ के लोग इस कदर मुतासिर हुए कि बार बार गुफ्तगू में आपका जिक्र आ जाता है। आप गालिब के बड़े शहदाई हैं और आपकी गुफ्तगू से ही मुझे ये भी मालूम हुआ था कि गालिब के कलाम का आपने पंजाबी में तर्जुमा भी किया है, जिसे मसरूफ़ के सबब आप मुकम्मल नहीं कर सके। मेरी ख्वाहिश है कि आप इस काम को भी मुकम्मल करके शाया कराएं। हाज़रीन, हमारी खुशबख्ती है कि आज की इस यादगारी खुतबे में प्रोफेसर मोहम्मद अफशार आलम साहब बहैसियत मेहमान खुसूसी तशरीफ लाए हैं। प्रोफेसर अफशार आलम साहब जामिया हमदर्द के वाइस चांसलर हैं। आपने अलीगढ़ यूनिवर्सिटी से मास्टर्स के बाद जामिया मिलिया इस्लामिया से PhD की डिग्री हासिल की और जामिया हमदर्द में दर्स व तदरीस से वाबस्ता रहे। اب تک آپ کے 150 سے زائد علمی مقالات موقع جرائد میں چھپ چکے ہیں. خصوصی لیکچر کے لیے آپ کو ملک و بیرون ملک سے دعوت دی جاتی ہے اور آپ کے خطبات علمی دنیا میں اپنا خاص وقار و امتیاز رکھتے ہیں. جامعہ ہمدرد میں آپ کی وائس چانسلرشپ میں آئندہ کام کرنے والوں کے لیے مشعل راہ ثابت ہوگی. آپ نے یونیورسٹی میں اکیڈمک فضا ہموار کرنے کے لیے مؤثر اقدام کیے ہیں. ہم ان کا خیر مقدم کرتے ہیں. حضرات، آج کے اس یادگاری خطبے کو ایران کے کلچرل کاؤنسلر ڈاکٹر فخرالدین فرید اسد کی شرکت نے اور بھی یادگار بنا دیا ہے. جناب فخرالدین فرید اسد حال ہی میں ہمارے ملک میں بطور کلچرل کاؤنسلر تشریف لائے ہیں. آپ ایک نہایت فعال اور ملٹی ڈائمینشنل شخصیت کے حامل ہیں. ایران میں آپ کو بہت اہم اور موثر عہدوں پر کام کرنے کا تجربہ حاصل ہے. میں آپ کا بھی یہاں پر خیر مقدم کرتا ہوں، استقبال کرتا ہوں. حضرات، پروفیسر صدیق-ور-رحمان کدوائی صاحب سے ہم سب واقف ہیں. ان کی برجستہ گفتگو اور گزارش شخصیت کا ہم سب گواہ ہیں. آپ نے ایک عمر درس و تدریس میں گزاری ہے اور جب سے آپ اس ادارے کے سیکریٹری منتخب ہوئے ہیں، یہاں کی علمی سرگرمیوں کا دائرہ نہ صرف بڑھا بلکہ اس میں ایک قسم کا تنوع بھی پیدا ہوا ہے. ہم خود کو خوش نصیب مانتے ہیں کہ ہمیں ایسا مربی و رہنما ملا ہے. آپ اس وقت اردو کے سب سے سینئر ادیب ہیں اور آپ کی تحریر علمی حلقوں میں جو وقار مرتبہ رکھتی ہیں، اس سلسلے میں کچھ عرض کرنا سورج کو چراغ دکھانے کے مترادف ہوگا. میں بڑے ہی ادب و احترام کے ساتھ پروفیسر صدیق-ور-رحمان کدوائی صاحب سے درخواست کرتا ہوں کہ آپ باقاعدہ مہمانوں کا استقبال فرمائیں. پروفیسر صدیق-ور-رحمان کدوائی صاحب.
یہ غالب انسٹیٹیوٹ کا اینول لیکچر جو جناب فخرالدین علی احمد صاحب کی یاد میں ہوتا ہے، یہ ایک بڑا خاص موقع ہوتا ہے. نہ صرف اہل علم کے آپس میں ملنے کا اور تبادلہ خیال کا، بلکہ سال میں ایک بار کسی اہم اہل علم کو مدعو کر کے کو سننے کا بھی موقع ملتا ہے. ہم اس بات کی کوشش کرتے ہیں کہ غالب کی جو شہرت اور ناموری ہے وہ ان کی شاعری اور ان کے خطوط کی وجہ سے یقیناً ہر طرف ہے اور زیادہ ہے، لیکن انہوں نے جن موضوعات پر لکھا ہے اور جس طرح ان کا تعلق زندگی اور حیات و کائنات کے مسائل سے رہا ہے، اس کے پیش نظر ہماری خواہش یہ ہوتی ہے کہ ان کی یادگار میں جو لیکچر ہو اس کا تعلق محض شاعری یا ادب سے نہ ہو، بلکہ انسانی زندگی کے اور انسانی فکر و فلسفے کے ایک پوری وسعتوں کے اندر کہیں نہ کہیں جو ضرورتیں ہیں اس کے مطابق ہو، اور ایسے اہل علم کو مدعو کیا جائے جن کا دائرہ ہی محدود نہ ہو بلکہ جو انسانی زندگی کے تمام پہلوؤں کی طرف غور کرتے ہیں. تو ہم نے ہمیشہ اس بات کی کوشش کی ہے کہ غالب ایوان-e-غالب کا یہ حلقہ وسیع تر ہوتا جائے، اور ہماری خوش قسمتی ہے کہ پروفیسر اروند نے ہمارے کاموں سے دلچسپی لی. اپنی یونیورسٹی میں بھی بڑا فنکشن کیا انہوں نے، اور آمادگی ظاہر کی ہمارے انسٹیٹیوٹ سے دلچسپی لینے کی اور یہاں لیکچر دینے کی. چنانچہ ہم نے انہیں مدعو کیا اور ہماری یہ خوش قسمتی ہے کہ انہوں نے ہماری دعوت کو قبول کیا، اور ہم آئندہ بھی اپنے اسی طریقے پر، جیسے کہ پہلے بھی ہم نے ایک روایت قائم کی ہے، آئندہ بھی اسی پر قائم رہیں گے. میں لمبی گفتگو کرنے کی بجائے اس وقت رحمت دینا چاہتا ہوں پروفیسر اروند کو کہ وہ تشریف لائیں. ڈاکٹر अफशार आलम साहब हमदर्द चांसलर हैं और बहुत ही जानी पहचानी शख्सियत है यहाँ, उनका होना भी हमारे लिए बड़ी बात है। मैं उनका भी इस्तेमाल करता हूँ। मैं इन अल्फाज के साथ प्रोफेसर अरविंद से दरख्वास्त करता हूँ कि वो
आज के मेहमान मुकर्रर पंजाबी यूनिवर्सिटी के वाइस चांसलर प्रोफेसर अरविंद साहब से दरख्वास्त है कि आप बउनवान हिकमत इंसानी के इल्म जमाओ मकासिद मुहावरा लेक्चर के
It's a matter of honor for me to be invited to give this prestigious lecture in an institute which is named after Mr Ghalib, who is one of those poets of India or the city Delhi, whose work is an example of the title that I have given, that Epistemes of civilizational wisdom can actually express themselves through different walks of life, different ways of creation of knowledge, from poetry to science to philosophy to any domain that we can think of. When we were discussing the plan of this lecture, I mentioned that I will connect many different disciplines while I go on, and then definitely we should open the discussion for an open debate. In case there are interventions, they can come at the end. I want to begin from two notions of universality of knowledge, because the knowledge that as we see it and we conceive it is a human knowledge. And if you look at human knowledge, of course there is an internal knowledge which is there to every human being, which is insight, and which is not something that we are talking about. We are talking about the knowledge which is communicated, which comes out. And for any kind of communication, you need two human beings, you need a language, and you need to set up a system of a discourse or a conversation, and you have to put your thoughts out. Now that process already requires a universality, because what is understood by two people, they have to agree upon a certain norm, a certain grammar, a certain language. Then we generalize it to a group. Then that can be a linguistic group, which means people who speak the same language. But then the things don't end there. We have to go beyond that. There are other human beings who speak a different language, who write in a different language. We need to reach out to that. And then we have to translate, and we have to keep going on till we reach the entire humanity. So all humans at the end, we realize once we open up a communication with other human beings, we realize that at the end of it, we all internalize knowledge in the same way. All our brains are wired in the same way. So therefore, there is a certain universality to human knowledge. So that is the one kind of universality I want to bring in. Universality which goes across all human beings and entire humanity. It is not knowledge which is just my own personal wisdom or knowledge. It is something which is shared by the entire humanity. Now when we talk about humanity and this generalization and universality, of course space, time and language come into the picture. Now space come into the picture because different human beings live in different parts of the planet. Time comes in because things happen in the past and we connect with people who lived in the past through their work, through their books, work, literature, music, whatever that may be. So this universality go across space, time and language, because language is a very big barrier, but once you cross that barrier, you realize that languages are not very different. At the end of the day, as my colleague from Jamia, who is a computer scientist, would agree, that these are all grammar-based constructions. So there are rules, of grammar and there is a vocabulary. You put things together and you begin to understand things. So this is my first point about universal human knowledge going across space-time and language. The second is that if you look at pure sciences, whether it is biology or whether it is physics or chemistry, you don't expect laws of physics to be different in United States and in India. You don't expect laws of physics to be different in different parts of the earth. So that's another kind of universality. You don't want, when you send a space vehicle to moon, you don't expect that laws of physics will be different at moon or in a different part of the universe. So again, laws of science are not dependent on location. They have to be independent of location at which we are building a laboratory or doing experiments. They also have to be independent of time, which means that you don't really change the laws when the century changes and when the time changes. The laws of natural sciences remain same as the time moves on. So they are invariant under space-time. But then comes a very interesting universality which we immediately do not think of, which is the state of motion. Einstein in 1905 realized this very strongly when he postulated his theory of relativity. His basic premise was that laws of physics cannot be different if you are moving. So if you are in a spaceship or in a car or in a train, the laws of science still remain the same. So that's another kind of universality of scientific knowledge, which is same in different parts of the universe, which is same in time, whether it is past or future or and so on, and which is also same independent of the state of motion of the observer or the person who is doing, who is looking at these laws. And immediately I wanted to put this as two different premises, one coming from knowledge which is in the domain of literature and poetry and so on, and one from science. And you see the universality is approached in a very similar way between the two. Normally people in these different disciplines don't look at it this way, but now that I put it this way, you see the similarity of this universality. And at the end of it, if you see, science is human creation like language, and through science what one is doing is one is trying to understand the world around us from a human perspective, and science therefore is a language. And that language is constrained by, because it's a language in which we talk about the world around us. So it has to say something about the world. It is not something which is only the internal thoughts of a person. It has to say something concrete about the world. That is a constraint within which you construct science. But many times people feel, because particularly since I interact with a large number of people coming from different disciplines, people ask the question, is science not about those graphs that we plot? No. Is science not about the data that we collect? No. That is not science. Those are tools which are used to validate or bring about scientific hypotheses to be right or wrong. Science is exactly like literature and poetry. You create something from your mind which says something about the world. And then, of course, there is the next step, like the literary works or a poetry and all that is validated by peers. Science is also validated by fellow scientists. If the fellow scientists don't think that your science is good, it has to be discarded. Only thing is that the parameters used are to do with the external world. It has to fit into the frame in which it is an investigation of. So only the context is different. The process of creation and validation is something very, very similar. So I thought it's important to bring out these similarities. That was the first part of what I wanted to say. The second part of what I wanted to say is about my own discipline. And my discipline is quantum physics. And as you may be aware that quantum physics came into existence about 100 years ago, particularly in the beginning of 20th century. And today it is becoming very important because it is getting connected with the computer science and information theory, and we are talking about quantum information devices and we are talking about quantum computers. But that is not what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about is how quantum physics has changed our way of thinking about the world, and then you will see where I am pointing to. In the classical way of thinking about the world which existed in the late 19th century, everything is certain. So Laplace, who was a French mathematician of the 18th century, said that, you know, the world is like a machine, the world is like a computer. You give it certain inputs, you crack something out and something comes out. It's all predictable, deterministic world. That was the model of, based on Newtonian way of looking at things, Laplacian calculator as they call it. Now what quantum physics tells us is that it is not like that. Quantum physics tells us that if there is an electron inside a molecule, that electron can be at two different locations at the same time. You don't have to, a particle doesn't have to commit to a particular space point. Then if you have uranium nuclei which are going to decay because of radioactivity, you don't know which one is going to decay. You only know the chance of decay. Nobody knows which one is going to decay, which means that there is a world of possibilities. And that world of possibilities becomes an actuality when things actually happen. So this uncertainty or the possibilities which are more than one is intrinsic to our world. And that's amazing because that is not very different from our thought process. Before you say something, there might be 100 different possibilities in your mind. But then you say only one thing. So when you act, you do something, that action makes that basically collapses that space of possibilities into one actuality, because you will do only one action and move on. Exactly the same way it happens in quantum physics. When you have a system, it is full of possibilities. You observe it, it will commit to one actuality. So this is one aspect of the quantum world. Another aspect of the quantum world is that logic is very different. So I normally give this example. I know my audience is non-technical and I completely understand that. I will not get into unnecessary technicalities. See, in the classical world, what happens is that you interact with the system, you learn about that system, you extract information, and that's a passive process of learning. For example, if you read a book, you put it back in the shelf. Somebody else can go and read that book. In the quantum world, it's not like that. What happens in the quantum world is that if you read the quantum book, you put it back. When the next person goes and reads the book has actually changed because somebody else has read it. And that is also something which to classical physicists look very counterintuitive. But I think all of us understand this in an emotional way, in a literary way. Because if I go to my father's shelf, who's no more, and look at the books he has put there in 1950s, and pull out a book from that shelf and start flipping through it, the connection I build with that book is very different if I buy the same book now, a new edition from the market. So human interactions with the objects, it's not just one way of learning. They leave a mark. And that mark, again, in the quantum world is very essential. Similarly, in the quantum world, there is a law of diminishing returns, that if you ask too many questions, what you have learned from the earlier questions is lost. So I give this example, if you ask a student what is your name, the student tells you the name, then you say which class you study, the student tells you the class, then you ask another technical question, student answers, then you say what is your name. If you ask too many questions, the name can actually change because a quantum system is always becoming, as in philosophy they say that being is always becoming, and asking questions and interactions with a person or a system actually becomes agency of the change. So these are some of the aspects of the quantum world which became very important in after 1920s and 1930s when quantum mechanics was invented. And in that process, the way we look at the world fundamentally changed. And similarly, if you see in the biological world, again, so much revolution has happened over the past centuries. I mean, also another universality which science brings to in front of us. Of course, there is a whole notion of universality and equality of all human beings, which if you know that in the 20th century there were a lot of attempt to say that human beings come in different forms and there are different levels, certain races are superior and certain races are inferior. By the analysis of the human DNA in the past 30 years, it has been very clearly established that all human beings are not just same and similar, they have been genetically mixing very strongly. So this idea of purity of races and all that is more in our mind, and it is not really there in the actual world. So there is a universality across human beings. But if you look at Darwinian evolution, it tells you one more thing, that not just that all human beings are very similar, we are not very different from other animals. There is a universality. If you take any mammal and cut open and you see that inside of a mammal is not very different from a human being. So this whole disconnect that we see from the animal world is also maybe a construction of our own mind. We are not very different from animals in many different ways. And animals are not very different from plants and so on. So there is a universality and connectivity across life on earth, which also has been realized in the past 200-300 years as we have kind of dwelled on these things. So at the end of the day, when you see the universality of life, as you see the universality across different parts of the universe, you realize that there is nothing so much special about human beings. There is not much special about Earth either. So we are a very small, Earth is a planet which goes around the sun. The whole solar system is inside a galaxy called Milky Way, and in Milky Way there are billions and billions of stars. Sun is just one of them. Galaxy itself is one of the millions of galaxies, and that humbles you. This whole idea that as human beings came out of caves and built a civilization and they gathered around, they kind of became very complacent, thinking that Earth is the center of the universe and human is the center of all living organisms. But as we have learned, we have seen that that is not really true, and it humbles us in many different ways. So these were the kind of universalities that I wanted to point out. The last part, what I want to say is that what happens with the knowledge is that the process of knowledge creation is a very wide domain today. So people create knowledge in many ways. Even the creativity in terms of literature and all that is there in so many people. And then how do you connect? So one filter through which we see things is what has really survived in time. What are the timeless epistemes of wisdom which get filtered through civilizational time scales? And of course we know that there are, like if you look at Baba Farid, who's 1,000 years old, today also people talk about couplets of Baba Farid, recite them and so on. And the wisdom which is encoded in that poetry doesn't really become old or stale. Now if you come to Mr Ghalib, there is one more aspect, that it is not just that there is certain kind of wisdom in Mirza Ghalib's poetry, it also always sounds very contemporary. So that is maybe sets him apart. That it is not just encoding of certain wisdom, it is connecting with human beings. I mean, after all, Ghalib's word is more than 150 years old. So many generations have gone through. But when he talks about human predicament, when he talks about human take on things, when he talks about philosophical notions, he sounds very contemporary. And therefore, I think Mirza Ghalib is one example which should be brought in to say that modernity in Indian context should not be connected with modernity in the Western context. We did not become modern because the modern thought came from West to India. In Indian context, if you want to give an example of a very modern poet, I would say Mirza Ghalib is one of the most modern poets to whom you can connect very directly. And in his poetry, of course, there is modernity which can be talked about in detail, and many of you are experts in that. What I wanted to say was give you few examples. And also, for example, in the beginning itself, Ghalib says that आग ही दानिश-उनीदन जिस कदर चाहे बिछाए मुद्दा उनका है अपने आलमे तहरीर का. Now you see how this whole, how you can interpret this particular share in so many different ways. And I would like to say that Ghalib is basically telling what is the responsibility of the intellectual, or what is the responsibility of the poet or the philosopher or whoever claims to be creating knowledge. Because what Ghalib is saying is that since it is coming out of your own mind, your own intellect, and you are going to spread this whole world of saying and listening and conversation, and the knowledge has to flow from your mind, from your own intellect. Therefore, there is no excuse for lack of quality, lack of novelty. So he is putting a constraint on himself that whatever you are talking about, the Buddha has to be, there's no excuse for it to be stale or old or not new or not sufficiently creative. And if you think further, it is a constraint which is a very important constraint within which all the people who are creating knowledge should actually work. Similarly, in the opening lines, of course, you all know, my title is actually motivated by the first line of Aiwan-e-Ghalib, that not the first line, that कैश तस्वीर के पर्दे में भी उड़ियां निकला. So that is exactly is that civilizational wisdom that I am talking about, that cannot get covered even in time. You cannot really, it cannot lose context and reality whether you cover it as many times as you wish. So this is how Mirza Ghalib connects with so many different things, and specifically with the quantum world. I would say that when he says that सब कहाँ कुछ लाला व गुल में नुमाया हो गई, खाक में क्या सूरतें होंगी जो पिन्हा हो गई. So whatever might be inside, what comes out beautifully is one thing, and that's what you see. So this whole world of possibilities and actuality is unfolded in Ghalib's literature in many different ways. So idea was not really for me to talk too much about these things, because that's not my domain of expertise. But what I wanted to say was that Ghalib is a very modern poet, very easy to connect with him and his take on deeper human emotions and of human predicament. I would say that how we all are trapped, and that trap itself is the source of our freedom. All these things come in. But the universality point I wanted to connect it with, that if you look at civilizational time scale, some things stick out as I said that, you know, Einstein's theory of relativity sticks out, and Darwinian way of looking at evolution of species sticks out, and many other things. Similarly, Ghalib's poetry would always stick out as a take on civilizational wisdom, as an episteme of wisdom, which would be like a crystal in the domain of poetry, philosophy and knowledge. And this recognition must come from the people in this region in which he lived and unfolded his work. And as you see, generation after generation, people connect with him in a very different way. And of course, there is another principle that such a poet would require a community of poets in which he lived, and that from that community in the guild only the quality comes. Unless you have a lot of activity going on, that filtered crystals of knowledge don't really come. So therefore, creating this ambience and nurturing these ambiences of creation of knowledge should be supported. With these words, I would like to end my presentation, and if the organizers have a session in which we could have question answers, I would be happy to take that. Thank you.
हज़रात, आप प्रोफेसर अरविंद साहब का पूर्ववक्त मकाला समाअत फरमा रहे थे। आज के मेहमान खुसूसी प्रोफेसर अफशार आलम साहब, वाइस चांसलर जामिया हमदर्द से दरख्वास्त गुजार हूँ कि आप तशरीफ लाएं और अपने ख्यालात का इजहार फरमाएं। प्रोफेसर अफशार आलम साहब।
Good evening. Assalamu alaikum. Respected Justice Badar Durrez Ahmed, President of Ghalib Institute, Professor Arvind, Vice Chancellor Punjabi University, Professor Sadiq-ur-Rahman Kidwai, Secretary Ghalib Institute, Dr. Idris Ahmad, Director Ghalib Institute, eminent guest on the dais of ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a privilege and a great honor to be here with you, to be the chief guest on the Fakhruddin Ali Ahmed Memorial Lecture being delivered by Professor Arvind on Epistemes of Human Wisdom, Transcending Space-Time. Many eminent personalities delivered the memorial lecture earlier. Fakhruddin Ali Ahmed Sahab is still considered one of the top 3 Muslim leaders in India during pre and post independence. Other, Maulana Azad and Dr. Zakir Hussain. You all know that about Janab Fakhruddin Ali Ahmed Sahab, who served as Education Minister of India from 13 November 1966 to 12 March 1967. During his tenure, the Kothari Commission submitted his report to provide policies and guidelines for the development of education in India, among others. These are paved the way of many change in the education sector, including free and compulsory education for children and paradigm shift in higher education. Fakhruddin Ali Ahmed Sahab played a very vital role in Indian politics during 60s and 70s. He was the Finance Minister of Assam in 1939. Again, he became Minister in 57 to 66 in Assam as the Minister of Finance. And he also served as a Cabinet Minister in Srimati Indira Gandhi's government in the Ministry of Power, Irrigation, Industries, Agriculture till 1974. During his as Agriculture Minister, he played a very important role for Green Revolution. He was the second Muslim to serve the country as the President of India. His contribution to the community and society is well known. Where I am sitting at the moment is one of his very important contributions. Our family had a great relationship with Janab Fakhruddin Ali Ahmed Sahab. on his way to his Assam, he used to stay in Kishanganj during his visit to Assam in his constituency, because that time the broad gauge train will change to meter gauge trains. So he supported my family, my uncle, my grandfather in politics. His contribution as a barrister is well known. He practiced at Lahore High Court, thereafter moved to Guwahati. At Guwahati, he became the Advocate General of the state. He was the founding president of Bar Association of the Assam High Court after his formation in 1948. During my student days in Aligarh, many students used to talk about the Fakhruddin Ali Ahmed Sahab stature as a politician, statesman and social reformer, and his strong support to Aligarh Muslim University. I had been fortunate to meet Begum Abida Ahmed Sahiba, ex-MP, on many occasions and discuss many things including education of minorities and downtrodden communities. As you all know, Jamia Hamdard is one of the primary institutions in the country and the higher education, and we are number one in pharmacy and top 50 institution in the country and figured as QS global ranking. And we are doing lot of outreach programs for the upliftment of society and the older people through our nursing school, medical science and allied health program. So I take this opportunity to request the chairman of the Ghalib Institute to start some kind of MOU or some other joint program with Ghalib Institute. So I take this opportunity that Jamia is ready to extend cooperation with Ghalib Institute. I will again wish to convey my sincere thanks to the chairman and the other office bearers and the executive member for giving me an opportunity and honor stand before you. I wish that Ghalib Institute, supported by the Ministry of Culture, all the best in its future endeavor. Thank you very much.
बहुत शुक्रिया अफसर आलम साहब। हजरात, बाहर जो लॉन है हमारा, तो वहाँ फखरुद्दीन साहब की कुछ यादों का हमने पोर्ट्रेट वहाँ पर जो है बनाया है। अगर वक्त मिले तो आप उसको भी जो है देखिएगा उसको। हम मेरी बहुत ही अदब एहतराम के साथ गालिब इंस्टीट्यूट के चेयरमैन और जम्मू कश्मीर के चीफ जस्टिस जनाब बदर दुरेज अहमद साहब से दरख्वास्त है कि आप तशरीफ लाएँ और सदारती कलमात से नवाजें। जस्टिस जनाब बदर दुरेज अहमद साहब।
मौजूदा चीफ जस्टिस है, रिटायर्ड फॉर्मर चीफ जस्टिस, अब उम्र हो गई हमारी भी। प्रोफेसर अरविंद, प्रोफेसर आलम, सदीक साहब, इदरीस और Ma'azez Hazrin, this lecture that was given by Professor Arvind, actually from the very first day when Dr. Idris came to me and said I would like to invite Professor Arvind from Punjabi University to give the memorial lecture. So he asked me what would be the topics. I said, you ask him and he would give the topics, and it is up to him to deliver the lecture in the field or topic of his choice. Then when the topic came, I took out the dictionary, literally, to find out as to what is the meaning of epistemes. I've heard of epistemology and epistemologists, but I wanted to know what are the epistemes of human wisdom. And I really thank him for introducing me to an absolutely delectable field of study. That is, what is the foundations of knowledge and what are the foundations of human wisdom, which are not only limited by space but also not limited by time. And I think he beautifully brought it out that persons like Ghalib, through his poetry and even his prose, laid down certain foundations of this wisdom which are as relevant today as they were relevant 150 years ago, and probably as relevant as 1000 years ago. So these are pieces of knowledge or wisdom, if you may call that, which transcend time, and it will remain like this even 1,000 years from now. People who would be reading Ghalib would say, okay, oh, it fits into the modern day. And I was just discussing with them that because of the advent of artificial intelligence, I don't know what is going to happen to human wisdom. I don't know whether it will survive or it won't survive. Whether there will be machine wisdom, I don't know. But things are moving very rapidly. And this topic of study, which is basically the foundations of our wisdom and knowledge. For example, good versus evil. This is a concept which permeates through all societies. Whether it's Iran, whether it's India, whether it's Australia, whether it's Germany, there is always a struggle between good and evil. Of course, the perceptions of what is good and what is evil may change, but the concept that good is better than evil has pervaded through time. Similarly, there are things like crime and punishment. This is my field of study, the justice system. How do you deal with crime? How do you deal with punishment? It has always been the case throughout humanity that if there is a crime, there must be a punishment. Now, this is a part of our human wisdom, but of course, the type of punishment changes. I'll give you an example. In Hammurabi's code of law, even if somebody stole something, the punishment was death. If somebody slapped something, the punishment was death. And it became so draconian that ultimately the punishments had to alter across time. But the concept, the basic foundation, that is what an episteme is, I suppose, if I am correct, if I am not wrong, that there must be a punishment for a crime, has continued and pervaded through time. Similarly, in the field of science, which Professor Arvind is an expert on, knowledge is developed in contradiction to faith. You see, people can believe something, but is that something real? Is it a law, like a law of nature? What is a natural law? Similarly, in the judicial field, we also have human rights. What are these human rights? How did they evolve? They evolve on the principles of equality, fraternity, justice, which are all enshrined in our constitution. That is also a part of our collective wisdom. Unfortunately, people tend to overlook these things. But this is a very important aspect of our lives. That what we have collected through thousands of years of learning and put it as a collective body which is available to us is based on certain foundations where people do fact checking. Another problem with knowledge is truth versus falsehood. That is a very relevant thing today. How much is true and how much is false? And how do you gauge and differentiate between something that is true and something that is false? So these are, I really thank Professor Arvind for taking and selecting this topic, because it has given me a new line of thought and a new avenue of doing my own personal research as to what are the basic building blocks and foundations for knowledge and wisdom. And not only just knowledge and wisdom, but that knowledge and that wisdom which will pervade through time and will not see any territorial borders. So thank you very much, Professor Arvind, for giving us an illuminating lecture on this, and thank you everybody else. Professor Alam, of course, for speaking very kindly about my father, and to all the people who are present here for patiently going through a very philosophical and deep subject. Thank you very much.
बहुत शुक्रिया चेयरमैन साहब। हमने अपनी और इदारे की जानिब से प्रोफेसर अरविंद साहब, प्रोफेसर अफशार आलम साहब, जस्टिस जनाब बदर दुर्रेज़ अहमद साहब, प्रोफेसर सदीक-ur-Rahman किदवाई साहब, सलीम किदवाई साहब, मेरे उस्ताद फारूक बख्शी साहब यहाँ तशरीफ रखते हैं, कासमी साहब और हमारे जो मेहमान हैं ईरान कल्चरल काउंसलर फरीदुद्दीन साहब, अकबर साहब, ताहिरुल हसन साहब और तमाम हाज़रीन का मैं दिल की गहराइयों से शुक्रिया अदा करता हूँ। और अब मेरी आपसे दरख्वास्त है कि हम लोगों ने एक मामूली सा तो हमका इंतज़ाम किया है डिनर का, तो असातिज़ा के लिए हमने यहाँ इंतज़ाम किया है और बाकी जो मेहमान हैं उनके लिए हमने जो हमारे ऑडिटोरियम का जो लॉबी है उसका इंतज़ाम किया है। तो आपसे बहुत ही अदब के साथ दरख्वास्त है कि आप तशरीफ़ लाएँ और डिनर फरमाएँ। बहुत शुक्रिया।